KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan, Brian Boitano Moriarty Dagan. Thank you for joining me today. How are you, my friend?
I thought you were going to introduce me as Dagan, shit-faced cockmaster.
I could go anywhere.
You could have went a lot of different ways with that.
Yeah, well, we don't want to come right out of the gate with that. But how's life? How are you doing over there?
I'm super. Thanks for asking.
Wow, you're full of pizzazz today.
I got a lot of energy.
I'm happy for you.
Yeah,
I'm really
man.
happy to hear that. Good.
Yeah, everything's fine. I'm just noticing right as we signed on to start talking to each other before we started rolling. Noticing I got a little bit extra beer. I don't like to have so much beer. Do you know why? Because look at all the white. Look at all the gray in there.
I like it though.
Talk about Gandalf.
Gandalf.
I like. You know how I like to roll.
Smaug. They somehow got 4 syllables out of that word. I don't know.
I like to roll into the podcast call personally.
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna get to this, but I like to do like the Don Draper, 5 o'clock shadow, shirt sleeves, conference room, copywriters, art director, late night, crunching the pitch for the big client type look. This is not. Right. I mean, look at me. I mean, John Hamm. No. The first thing you think is John Hamm. First of all,
definitely. I thought you were going to say you're getting shit faced, drinking a half a bottle of bourbon.
Maybe the secretary's involved.
Yeah.
Well, that's not right. So talk to me, my friend. You have big news today. Topical, certainly.
Yeah, certainly. I got my shot today. Well, I got the first of 2 shots today.
You got it.
And I just wanted to say, like, I was pretty. I make fun of the government all the time. In fact, I hate the government. But the federal government is. I mean, and the state government, local government here, or whatever in Virginia. I was pretty impressed by how efficient it was. I'm sure it wasn't always this way, but I went to the Richmond racetrack.
Okay.
In Henrico.
That's where they're having it?
Well, they have like a bunch of different places, but that's like a big place. Okay. And then they just funnel you in. They like check you in, you park, and then you just go in. And I was literally there for like 5 minutes, if that, the entire thing.
It is efficient. I've heard that when Helene went for the J&J shot, but she said it was the same.
Oh, lucky.
Obviously different spot, but she said it was the same thing. It was very well orchestrated, everything. Everybody had an iPad, boom, 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 boom. They process you get it done. You sit. You sat for the 15 minutes to make sure there was no reaction?
No, I didn't do that.
You didn't do that?
No, that wasn't the thing anyone even told me to do that. I don't know. That wasn't. They literally, there was 2. So I walk in to the facility. I check in with like a military dude who's just there. I was thinking about making a joke to this guy, but I didn't. About like, wow, this is a pretty good gig. Because there's
low pressure, probably going to be all right.
Yeah, I was like, because I was being fucking Syria right now or something. So
was he armed?
You're checking to no, he had like his fatigues on. I think it's just like, National Guard stuff or whatever. But I saved that one, kept that one to myself. And then he gave me my card and checked me in. And then I just they funneled me into this table. And then there was 2 women, one on a computer. And I guess like the nurse that was giving the shot, they just like signed me in. Okay. And then they just gave me the shot and that was it. And I gave them I have my California ID still. So they were like, talking to me a little bit about that. And then they were like, do you have any questions about anything? And I'm like, no, not really. And they're like, okay, bye.
That was it.
Yeah. Because they literally said, do you have any questions about what you've been reading online? And I'm like, no.
Okay.
Because I would have actually preferred the Johnson & Johnson shot, but that just, was taken offline and that just wasn't what they had. So I have to go back in a few weeks. But I did want to say just it was very efficient. And I'm not one of these people that is going to guilt other people into getting the shot. I think you have to do it whatever you want. I'm not, right. It doesn't really matter to me, to be perfectly honest.
Right.
But this was an important step for me to reestablish myself with the family since everyone's had the shot for like a long time now. Like,
are you the last one? Are you the last vestige?
Yeah, definitely. Like by probably a couple of months, so.
Oh, wow. So Uncle Mike and Carla, everybody's got it.
Yeah, they got the J&J shot and they were, I was making fun of everyone because remember when it was first available, only like immunocompromised people can get it and older people. Elderly. So then like there was all this scuttlebutt about like, well, if you go to Publix, around closing, they'll have some extras and you can go ask them or whatever. And I'm like, and Uncle Mike and Aunt Carla like kept telling me this a few times, and eventually I'm like, how do you not know me? You think I'm going to do that? Like, you think I'm going to like go drive around from CVS to CVS in Chesterfield County and see if they have any extra Pfizer to give me? Like, do you know me at all? I won't even go into a restaurant without a reservation. Do you think I'm going to go hunt down the COVID vaccine? The other thing I was thinking though was that this was so efficient and like no questions asked that I'm like, you could have literally, they just poked me with the needle like, oh, you got AIDS now.
Oh my God, that just got dark.
You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know, I just walk into this place, I just trust everything's like totally true. Fine, and
I think of that all the time. I think about that at the dentist. Like, what if one of these appliances slips down my throat? Like what if one of these tools just goes right down? It's just a guy, it's just a dude. I know he's a professional, I know he trained hard, I know he's experienced, but like, this guy could fuck me all up. He's got his little tool and he's like, and drops it. For people that are watching it. Yeah, for people that are listening to the audio, I was just like fumbling with my knife or my pen. So dentist. So did you get your shot? Like, no, I haven't gotten it yet. I was a little bit, because they got it for our school district where the kids go to school and Helene works. They finally put it together for the teachers, the J&J vaccine. This was Helene's probably had it for 6 or 7 weeks now, I guess. They finally put that together. But I said, why don't they could swing it financially. Why don't they put it together for the spouses as well? Which now they did. So now apparently, just because I'm a spouse of somebody, a teacher in the district, I could go in and get it. Dad wants me to go to New York to get I guess they're doing the 2-part Moderna shot. I could go to Fort Totten or whatever. Where is that? Brooklyn or Staten Island? I'm not even sure where that is.
I don't know. I have no idea.
But he's like, just go, because families of FDNY could get it, Yeah,
because he told me that too. In case we were having any problems, like, you can just come here now. This was like a few months ago.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
He's like, you can just come here now and get it. And I'm like, I'm not that anxious for it. It was first of all, I created a little buffer between me and the family for a little while, so that was nice. Right. But
now you have no excuses.
I know. So now it's over, but.
It's public knowledge.
Yeah, it's good to have it over with. I have no personal problem with getting the shot, but I respect people's skepticism, and I'm totally like the second that my second shot is in, and then they're like 7 days or 10 days, whatever it is from there. I'm like I'm literally setting a timer. I'm never wearing a mask ever again after that.
Oh, so then you're in the that's how you feel. You're in the clear. How long is it between the 2 shots now? How long do you wait? What's the lapse?
I think it's 3 weeks or something. I have to go look. There's like a CDC website that tracks all this stuff. So
that's interesting.
But, it's very efficient, very surprising.
You're going to encourage people to do it, I think, with your story.
I hope so. I mean, I would love for people to go get the shot. I mean, again, I'm not one of these people that's going to rake you over the coals. I really do think it's a personal thing, and I respect whatever decision you make. But me personally, I think there's no reason not to get it. I don't. Some people were joking around with me being like, oh, you're going to be all 5G capable now and stuff. And I'm like, well, maybe so, but
that's going to be another. I like it though, that it's very smart on the government's behalf, federal, state, whatever level, to make no rigmarole. Like you said, it's very fluid. Go in, you're in and out, because that's going to encourage people, because people don't want to deal with a headache. They'll it's a shot. So any excuse not to get a needle, right? We all divert to being kids again. So it's good, man. I do have to do it. I think I do have to, I've been putting it off. So you're
just because I just feel like in normal, like then you don't have to worry about, or you don't have to worry about it anymore. I guess,
Yeah.
I'm kind of convinced many people got it and have the immunity, but we don't know. What's to each his own. Do what you want. Do whatever you want. How's that?
That's fair. Fair enough, my friend.
All right, Dave. Well, today's topic is a fan voted topic. I'm excited about it.
Bitch.
It's the 1999 film South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. And I'm really excited to talk to you about this film for 2 reasons. We haven't really ever gotten a chance to talk about South Park on this show. And under the new rules, I don't know that we'll ever really cover South Park because it just is never going to end. Although with long running shows like South Park and The Simpsons and Family Guy and whatever out there, I'm sure we can eventually just start splicing them up if we wanted to.
Sure.
This show, just to put it in context for people, South Park began when I was in 8th grade. So I remember it really, really well. I lived with Dad in New Hampshire at the time. That 1 year he was up there. And I remember him being really against me watching the show, although I did watch it anyway. I remember him watching one of the early episodes when Jesus is like, isn't it like a wrestling match or a fighting match with Jesus?
He fights Santa in the very early, the initial.
Yeah, something like that. And I remember watching with Dad and him kind of being gruff about it, because he was always kind of gruff about Beavis and Butthead and all this other stuff, which I always found strange because he just didn't seem to care about almost anything else. He didn't care about my music. I told you that I bought home 311's Blue album when I was in 7th grade. There's a song called Guns Are for Pussies on it. And I remember him taking the CD and turning it around and reading it and then just giving it back to me. And I remember being like, okay. So stuff like that. And then I'd watch like Steven Seagal movies with him and like just really violent action movies like Copland. I remember watching like movies like that with him where I'm like, why are you letting me watch Copland right now with you? I'm 14, but
yeah, the action violence stuff for sure. Yeah, he wasn't.
Yeah, he didn't care. He didn't care about any of that.
So that was unchecked.
So, which is fine. I don't care. But so I have a funny memory of early South Park, and I wanted to talk to you about it from multiple angles. Obviously, we're going to talk about the film itself. It's about 3 episodes of the show long. It's totally produced in a different way. It's a musical and all of that. But I want to talk also to the audience about the cultural phenomenon that was South Park and how during this era it was everywhere. And I don't think that younger people really maybe know that. I think that there was really only one other cartoon that was ever at that level, and it was The Simpsons, probably from 1990 to 1993 or something. Like that was when it was like, Bart Simpson on everything in the Butterfingers commercial, on your shirt, on your skateboard, and all on your lunchbox.
Sure.
South Park was pretty similar, but much raunchier because it was much more overt. Simpsons, I think, is a little more under the vest, as it were, although I think The Simpsons is much worse than South Park, and we could talk about that too. I think The Simpsons is vastly overrated. Everyone knows that about me by now. But Dig, we've never talked about South Park, and you texted me actually that you had kind of forgotten how good it was.
Oh, man,
and
it's so good.
I've had that revelation multiple times in my own life over the years. And I specifically had those revelations when the 2 South Park role-playing games came out.
Of course.
One in 2014, I think, and the other in 2018.
Right.
When one from Obsidian, one from Ubisoft, where I was like, wow, this is fucking awesome. And this is so funny. And then I'd go on Hulu and like cut through a season, and then I'd kind of forget again. And watching the movie, which I haven't seen this film probably since high school, it was really nostalgic for me. So let's back up and what kind of is your remembrance of South Park at its embryonic stage? Because this was kind of coming to with its original special and all of that when you were just getting out of college. And I'm sure you have strong opinions one way or the other about, because I'm sure it's pretty frustrating to see some pretty crude bullshit like South Park, frankly, rise to the top and become what it is when people are doing like really stellar stuff. And I know that the early South Park really was like cutouts and stuff, and they quickly abandoned that.
Sure.
Talk to me about the whole kind of, there's so much to say about South Park. I'm just kind of curious as an artist what you think about it. Yeah.
Well, it is a massive topic. And I have to start by saying I'm super grateful to you guys, the guys and gals out there that voted for this for a fan topic, because doing the movie is a great way to slide into South Park as a whole, especially because the movie came very early. They were only 2 seasons deep into the show, I think, at the time, 1999. So the show was relatively new, very successful already. So when they did the feature came early on, so it's an early part of the South Park conversation. And yeah, it was a great way for me, really awesome, because I kind of treated this film and our discussion today as the beginnings of my deep dive into South Park as a whole. Whether, it's a conversation on Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the show as a whole, the comedy, what inspired it. They're in season, I think, 24 of the show right now. So think back to 1997. It's a long time ago. We think about the media that's pre 9/11. There's so much to say. And South Park, I always loved it. My very beginnings of South Park were, I think we talked about it on the show one time. I don't even know what topic it was at the moment, but I was in college at the time. The South Park, the original, what was it called?
It was like a Christmas special. Yeah.
Right. The Spirit of Christmas which was actually the second one that they did, apparently, which, as you said, was done with cut paper, stop motion under camera, very crude. It wasn't digital yet, obviously. And it was a pre-internet viral thing. And I remember one of my roommate's girlfriends brought over the VHS tape one night on a weekend. Remember, it was very cold. So I know that short was kind of released to the public in late 95, like Christmas time. So it must have been early 96. Let's say February, March. I remember it was very cold. She brought it over and, you know, it was the whole Santa versus Jesus thing. And it was just, I loved it. You know, it was very crude. The comedy was awesome. It was Jesus fighting Santa. They were doing Street Fighter moves. I remember I was really drawn to that. And it was like really quick, one and done, 5 minutes. And I was like, holy shit, this is like amazing. And you think about it, was that viral thing before, it was like an analog viral thing before YouTube was a thing. And I loved it immediately. And then when the series was released on Comedy Central in 97 and 98, those were my last 2 years of art school because I graduated in June of 98. And we loved it. I loved the comedy. It reminded me of sort of what we were already watching in the film festivals. Let's say like Spike and Mike's Twisted or something, where you had to go out and watch animation that wasn't mainstream. You went to a little film festival, you found out when it was playing every year, or Liquid Television, which we talked about, MTV's Liquid Television, which were like really irreverent, short, stylized things that were sort of far removed from what we're used to in television and feature film animation. Kid and adult content, you know, something that was coming from a place of, we'll get into this later when we talk about the art and everything and the style, but something that was coming from a place of comedy where the look and the feel and the design and the animation was sort of playing second fiddle to, you know, the characters and whatever comedy it was. You know, the art is in service of the comedy. And I, you know, as an animator, you would think, and there are people like this, obviously, that you become snobbish. You're like, oh, it's not on ones, or it's not, you know, Glenn Keane Disney feature fare, or something, you know, beautifully done for television, Batman the Animated Series or something. But it's different. You recognize it as different. It's like modern art compared to photorealistic art. You know, there's a place for everything. And that's really the way I always saw it. I was very open-minded to that sort of thing. Not only that, but because it was hysterical. I did find it really, really funny. And it's kind of amazing to think back to the late 90s and think like nobody ever tried to be that irreverent yet. You know, it's important also to mention, Colin, this. I was thinking, like, was South Park really the first, outside of the film festivals, outside of the little series like Liquid Television where there were, you know, a series of snippets or shorts, was there anything that was sort of like crudely animated where the comedy was really the vehicle for the thing? And I thought back to another one of my favorite things a couple of years earlier, Dr. Katz, Professional Therapist.
Oh yeah, that was a great
on Comedy Central.
Yeah, that was a great,
which was a great series with that whole squiggle vision style, very crude, very minimal animation, very crudely drawn. Later on, they would do that. Tom Snyder Productions would do things like home movies and stuff. But Dr. Katz was really the first thing that I remember just a couple of years earlier on the same network doing that whole thing where it wasn't really about the art. The art was just there to put forth the comedy.
Yeah, it was just like almost like a still that was just waving through 3 animations or whatever, right?
Yeah,
and then
they would just self-line everything really crudely, like trace back, and then it would squiggle or wiggle around. They called it squiggle vision. And so
I remember watching that show. And feeling so sophisticated in middle school. And I didn't really even understand it. I don't think. I just thought it was so cool.
You see, and because it struck you, because you were young, it struck you as different. You know, and then you get into, well, someday we'll talk about that, because I think Scott Katz is like one of the best characters. I think he's like hilarious and underrated. But so that's where the conversation starts for me. But unfortunately, you know, we all have to make, especially in today's day and age now, since the inception of South Park, we have to make time for the media that we want to consume. I never purposely put South Park on the back burner. It just kind of fell there. And, you know, and then, as you know, because we talk about doing South Park as a topic episodically or covering the seasons, and it becomes more and more daunting as they build up a body of work over, you know, decades now. So
definitely.
This is going to be a great place to start the conversation. You know, it's only a 81-minute film, and we could talk about, you know, start to talk about South Park and the characters and the world and the creators and the comedy and some funny things. Like, you know, I found out so much about Matt Stone and Trey Parker. I found out about their feud with Seth MacFarlane and the Family Guy camp.
They hate it.
So there's a lot of really fun, you know, production. We could talk about the 6 days that they do, 6 to 7 days where they produce an episode, which is enough to give me panic attacks as an animator. It's unbelievable. And just how the show is still relevant on television, right? A weekly television series is still relevant in this world of subscription services and video games and YouTube, and how strong it still is, I think. So it's a great place to start the conversation. I think I wish I thought of it, like, oh, that would be clever to just start it from the film, and then we could slowly sort of matriculate and start the conversation about South Park as a whole. But this is a great place to start the talk, man.
Yeah, I love their guerrilla production style, first of all, that they started doing, I think, kind of more towards the second half of the run, where it would be totally topical, and it's brilliant. And like you said, it is completely nerve-wracking, although I imagine their approach is like all hands on deck, and then everyone disappears for most of the year, which is a nice little twist and a nice little way to get things done, where you just kind of work really hard. You would imagine so, where everyone's like, dude, you're working for 3 months. That's what you do.
Right.
And then
you got the 100-hour work weeks for
right. And then you just go away.
And then
I'm sure that's, I would prefer that.
That's true. You know what's funny? They never talk about that though. They talk about they go to the Virgin Islands, they go to Aruba, whatever, but they don't talk about the crew works 100-hour weeks for weeks on end, but then they have 9 months off, and they make a lot of money. I'm sure they're well paid. So it's important to I think, acknowledge that, but they never do. They never talk. They never seem concerned about the public perception of that.
Well, that's what I think is interesting. Well, that's what's so interesting, I think, about this film specifically, is that, just reading a little bit about it, learning about how their feud with everyone began during this era, and that they really were, they still hold, obviously, complete control over this IP, but they did back then, and they really fought hard to make this film. I do want to give it up to Paramount and partners for identifying that they needed to get a film immediately. I mean, this film was under production when the first season of the show was like just beginning to air.
Very smart.
And I mean, I was thinking about this. I remember seeing the Simpsons movie in the theater. I think it was in 2007, maybe 2008 at the latest. And I was like, wow, it took them 20 years to get a movie out. And it took South Park 2 years, not even actually 2 years to get a film out from when it began, I think, into when it aired. So I thought that was interesting. But I think it's funny, the thing that I think is seldom talked about with Trey Parker and Matt Stone, and I think it's important, although I think some people try to play it down, is they're conservatives. And you can see it first of all, they talk about it. They're avowed libertarians, and you can see it in the humor. And I think that's maybe why South Park did speak to me in a way that others didn't. And it's a reason why I think Family Guy also spoke to me, although Seth MacFarlane is certainly liberal, but the humor is almost conservative in the sense that they don't really care who they offend. They're happy to punch down. Punching down, I always say punching down is funny. I don't know what else to say. Punching in every direction is funny. Punching up, down, left, right, in, out. And that's what I love, especially about the newer seasons, when like the whole season about political correctness and the PC principle and all of that. They made all of that. It's every season seems to be some sort of lampooning of typically liberal stuff. And I think that you kind of see it here in the beginning, because what we forget is that it's at this time in the 90s, as we're getting away from drama with the ESRB and Tipper Gore and Joe Lieberman and whatever was going on in that era. Now the offense started becoming liberalized. And I think that that's a relevant topic at this point, because we talked about it just recently with Freaks and Geeks. We were talking about D&D and how that plays a really important role in that show. And the right-wing attacks and the Christian conservative attacks and all of those kinds of things came from the right, came from evangelical Americans and all of that, and the right wing of the government. And then by this era, it's starting to shift. And at the vanguard of this are two libertarian cartoon creators. And I think I think it brings a totally different flavor, and that they've been able to not only survive, but thrive, being what they are and being overt about it, I think makes this really special. And I wonder, Dave, like, what kind of power does an animator or creative have to have in a writer's room or with producers and movie people, where it's like, we're going to make a movie that is probably not even, should probably have not even been rated R. And I was reading that there's some I don't know, Monday morning quarterbacking about why this movie probably maybe got by the goalie on that. But how do you even pitch something like this? And I guess what I'm curious about is like being in the industry yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm in the entertainment industry too, and being around such liberalism.
Sure.
Which is fine, but this show feels different. And I think that's what makes it stick around, is because there is no show like it.
No.
Because no show, it's not the weird animation and everything. It's just that, like you said, it's in service of something, and it's in service of a humor that is deeply offensive. And it's something that people are afraid of. Yeah.
It could, everybody says it's offensive, and I understand people construing it as offensive. But the thing that you said, and even taking it a step further, they'll punch right, they'll punch left, they'll punch anywhere in the middle. They pull no punches regardless of anybody. They don't seem to be, yes, everybody has their personal politics, but personal politics aside, they're swinging in every which direction. And I think it comes down to a few things. I think it comes down to the fact that nobody really ever tried it before. I think it comes from a very genuine place. There's a real authenticity. They're very good at standing their ground. They don't give an inch. They're going to do what they're going to do. And I think there was a place for it when it came in. Nobody had really, there was probably a lot of flop sweat or, a hesitance to try that. Although I'm sure people thought of it. I'm sure most people that would have done something of this flavor wouldn't really be involved in Hollywood or really wouldn't be involved in TV. But these guys decided to do that. And I think it says a lot. I love these two because they're a little high on themselves. You could see a little bit of ego Definitely. There, but
yeah.
At the same time, there is a lot of genius there. They have a really anti-Hollywood, a real authentic anti-Hollywood sort of look and feel to them. Like that's just really their sensibility. But what's really funny about it, I think, is how anti-celebrity they are. They're fucking so anti-celebrity. And I think it really comes from a genuine place. I don't think it's put on in any way or contrived. I think that's really who these guys are. And I think that resonates. That just comes through the content. You don't even have to watch the behind the scenes documentaries or 6 Days to Air or any of those really interesting pieces. You could just watch the show and get a sense of that, and through their other content and through the Book of Mormon and how big they've become on Broadway and the feature films that they do, the live action stuff. They've done puppets and marionettes, right? They've done, it doesn't matter. Like
basketball.
Basketball. I mean, all these things that you think back to, Orgasmo, like, these guys really have something to say. There's a certain brand of comedy. I think the medium that they chose says a lot. And, what they do, the other thing that's really important to say that I never hear is what they do takes such advantage of animation. The exaggeration, the absurdity, the way they push it to the nth degree. And not pushing the medium of animation like traditionally, like Squash and Stretch or pratfalls or, a cat falling down a manhole cover and still being alive. Like, you could take advantage of animation in a lot of different ways. These guys take advantage of animation really for the comedy. And I think there's something about it. This is probably a larger conversation maybe we could explore during the episode, but there's probably such an exaggeration and such a pushing to the comedy that it almost just, it takes the offensive out of it. I don't know, it's that they're universally offending. That's part of it. That they'll offend anything and anybody, but also just how far they push things turns any sort of perceived offensiveness for me into just pure comedy. I mean, how can you not laugh? It's funny. And I think a lot of it is just, even if you see yourself in there, like, I'm a pretty liberal dude. Like, if you're making fun of liberals, I'm on board. Like, I'm on board for that. Like, I think it's funny. A lot of it has to do with laughing at yourself, being able to laugh at yourself too. And I think they just, there's such a success to their formula, the way they do it, their longevity, obviously the proof's in the pudding. And I always thought, and the way the show hasn't really changed. Yes, technology's changed. Their canned effects have changed. The how many shots they could render has evolved over time, but the bones are still there from those very early, from the very early shorts, The Spirit of Christmas on. It's still the same flavor. It's still the same thing. They've been very true to themselves, and they've been very successful for it.
I wrote this down because as you were talking, I thought about it, and I'm glad that it came up now, which was the movie itself and the reaction to the movie at the time. And I really want to talk more about that. is a reflection of the evolution of offense. Because when I was watching it, well, let me back up. There, you know the song Sultan of, or not Sultans of Swing. It's the other Dire Straits song, I Want My MTV or whatever.
Of course. Oh,
they use the word faggot in that song like 3 times. And if you listen to it, it's like, did he just say that? You know, like, and that was on radio in the 80s, right?
Sure.
No problem at all.
Top 40, yeah.
So, and not edited, by the way. And so fast forward now to 1999. And I remember there being news stories about like, especially Uncle Fucker or whatever, like got the I don't know, some award for like the Guinness Book of World Records award for the most use of the word fuck or something like that. And I remember that I was watching it. I remember that being the big thing about like, look at all the times they use the word fuck and look at the titties and stuff. And I'm like,
sure.
I'm pretty sure Cartman just called that dude a faggot, you know? I'm pretty sure there's significant racist humor in this.
Of course.
Where like I was dying when they like strapped the black guys to the planes and the tanks. I was like,
the human shield.
I was dying. Complete genius, right? But I was like, that wasn't offensive to anyone. That never came up. None of that came up. It was literally the use of the word fuck. I remember being the most offensive thing, and the fact that they had like a cock and titties and they wanted to get away with all of this. But I'm like, they're using language and doing things that are so much more deeply offensive by modern sensibilities than the use of the word fuck, which is almost irrelevant in 2021. How do you feel about that? About the whole evolution of the way? Not that the movie's offensive, but it's now going to be offensive and probably is offensive to a whole new generation. Like I imagine a 20-year-old seeing this movie and not being offended by Uncle Fucker at all, which was like the big offensive thing, but being offended by the anti-Semitic jokes.
Right.
Stands like it's, you know, or being like, what do they call it? Operation Human Shield.
Operation Human Shield and they show the platoon and that one corner is just all the black guys, all the black soldiers. You know what's funny about it, Kyle?
It's so funny. Yeah.
First of all, that was brilliant to bring in the Dire Straits song. Whoever would have thought of that? But, you know, I think back, and I could be mistaken, but I think back to that song. I love that song and I love that music video. It was early CG animation, actually. So think about the mid-'80s. That song, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, was really supposed to be from the voices of like some blue collar workers, seemingly very ignorant. And they were talking about, you know, look at these rock musicians. They don't have to do anything and they have everything. They have girls and millions of dollars in cars.
Right. So, that's exactly what it's about.
Right. So when you watch something like South Park and you see somebody who's really ignorant, like Cartman, he's an anti-Semite. But he's obviously, you know, and one of his best friends, he's constantly making fun of Kyle because he's Jewish and everything like that. You don't side with Cartman. You think Cartman's like an ignoramus. And we all knew people like that. So is it offensive? Like when the soldiers, when Chef or whoever's leading the attack on Canada says like, oh no, Chef is part of the Operation Human Shield. When the officers are like, we're going to basically take the black guys and they're going to defend us from, you know, we're going to strap them to the tanks and strap them to the planes. We're making fun of the high brass of the military. They're supposed to be ignorant.
Right.
It's not offensive. It's supposed to be funny. We're not supposed to, you know what I mean? Like, I think I always, even as a younger man, I was older, already a college student when this came out, but I always saw it that way. I never saw it as offensive because, you know, there's ignorance in the world. You know, there's comedic things that happen. These people are nuts. You know, Cartman's mom is leading this Moms Against Canada thing. It's obviously, it's obviously supposed to be funny. Lighten up. That's how I always looked at it.
Yeah, it's a good point that it almost, to wit, is so over the top in a very similar way to Family Guy.
Yeah.
Where I think it feels less subversive. I think that might be why Dad wasn't so offended by it as much as he didn't want me to watch The Simpsons or Beavis and Butthead, because it was just, Beavis and Butthead's actually more subtle. I was just watching some Beavis and Butthead recently and I'm like, this is really funny, but not for the reasons I remember it being funny.
Yeah.
There was a scene I was watching from the movie where they're like, Butthead's ordering like food from Beavis, who's working at the burger place, and he keeps asking him like, can I get a pizza? And then he like just keeps walking away and going, he's like, we don't have a pizza, like on the, and it goes on for so long. I'm like, this is awesome.
So good.
But not for the, and that's Mike Judge, obviously, but who does voice in this movie, which I think is so cool, and their alliance with each other I think is neat as well. But
so cool.
Let's talk a little bit about the film itself. I think one of the big differences with this film that I think is later encapsulated more by Seth MacFarlane and Family Guy is the musical aspect of this. And that's, of course, something that Family Guy brought to an art. But it's funny because I don't remember when I first saw this movie, and we were talking about how I used to see everything in the theater at this time. I don't know that I did see this movie in the theater. What I remember about this is that, and this is what's so fun about 1999, is Mom gave me, so in 1996, we bought a Sony Vaio. It was our first PC like that we had at home. And Mom bought another PC in 1999 and drove down from Boston to Long Island and gave me the computer. And I had a computer in my room, and I was like so amped to have this in my room. I had like my own telephone line that Dad got me, and I was just always on the computer, and I was downloading stuff on Napster and WinMX and all that. And it was the soundtrack to the movie that I actually got before downloading it illegally, before the movie I ever saw the movie. So I know the characters because I was watching the show at the time. It was not very old, obviously, as we said, but being familiar with Uncle Fucker, or especially It's Easy MK, because I love Mr. Mackey like so much. He's like one of my favorite characters. Not my favorite character. I love that dude. So being familiar with all the different songs was kind of cool too. So I think that's an interesting place to kind of start, because it's so relevant and important, which is, what did you think of the soundtrack of this, and what are some of your favorite songs from it?
I mean, I love the fact that it's a musical, and the fact that, it has that Dr. Seuss-like poetry, very clever, very poking and prodding, parodying, making fun of everything. And, the music starts all from... The music always felt very modern to me in South Park in general. And we got to be very careful not to talk about the series as a whole, because I'm very uneducated with the series. But I do remember Primus being a big thing in the mid to late 90s. From the early 90s, Primus was a big thing. And they did a famous skateboarding part in Plan B Questionable video. I think it was Pat Duffy's part, was to a Primus song. And that put Primus on our maps as young kids. And I remember Les Claypool singing the intro song to South Park. So that they always had very modern musical sensibilities, and I know music is very important to those guys. I think they're both musicians, in fact. So not only writers and creatives in general, but I think they're both musically inclined, Parker and Stone. But so music always played a big part, and I love the fact that they're not afraid to bring in Korn, or they're not afraid to bring in Metallica, or, the modern music definitely plays a part. But also just the fact that, they'll do musical interludes. They'll treat the piece, the film in this case, like a musical. And later, of course, they do that with the Book of Mormon so beautifully. Everybody, I mean, how many accolades that thing got is unbelievable. But I love that. I love that it starts with a place of music. It feels like it makes it even more punk. I mean, we know their biggest inspirations. Mike Judge was certainly one of them. Monty Python and Terry Gilliam was certainly one of them. And they also came out of that sort of being grounded with music, and for in their case in England and London at the time, and coming out of that rock sensibility and bringing the comedy out of that, the comedy being part of that. So I always love it. Music seems like it's a really integral part of South Park in general, but you could certainly see that. I think they took extra advantage of that for the film, because you really, it punctuates moments. It was a good opportunity, bigger budgets to work with bigger artists. It's funny that they seem more inclined to work with famous musicians. Like, they seem to have an appreciation for rock music in general, where, they have that famous story of Jerry Seinfeld being a fan and getting in touch with them and saying, like, I really want to be involved in South Park. Let me voice a character. And they had their Thanksgiving special coming up at the time. And they turned around and told Jerry Seinfeld, sure, you could play Turkey Number 2, which was like a one-line part. Like, it was like a total fuck you to one of the biggest people in comedy.
Right.
You know what I mean? But they'll go out and then like really want to get Metallica or something. So you could see where their loyalties lie with the music versus the celebrity versus Hollywood and all that kind of stuff, which is cool.
Yeah, and Primus, I'm glad you brought up Primus, because they don't really play a role in this movie, which is unfortunate, but just even Les Claypool and the whole bass tone of Primus music is iconic people don't even realize that I can't even do it. I can hear it in my mind, but everyone knows what Primus bass sounds like.
Such a sound.
And they made that like a worldwide phenomenon, even if you don't know Jerry was a race car driver or something like that. You can hear that bass. So I'm glad you brought that up. But as far as the music is concerned, I just remember blasting this and downloading it on that early Napster. And actually, when I went to Northeastern a couple of years later, I very, very vividly remember there was if anyone goes to Northeastern, there's a hall there called Spear. And it's like shaped like a U. And I remember walking into it for some reason. I was seeing someone and there was like one window. I think it was maybe on election day of 2004 or something, but someone had like a Canadian flag hanging in their window. And then the other people across the way had like an American flag hanging in their window. And this was like just a thing, nothing of it. It's just, you noticed it over the months. And then some dude was just blasting Blame Canada out of the window when I walked by one day, and the other dude had their windows open, and it was like something that they were doing. And I kind of associate that with this film as well.
So awesome.
Although it was years later, but I really, really, really love a few of the songs. And then there are kind of some throwaway songs too, but I'll give a shout out to Uncle Fucker, obviously.
Oh my God.
Is awesome.
So funny.
And then It's Easy MK is awesome. It's Easy MK. And then Blame Canada is obviously iconic. What Would Brian Boitano Do? Iconic.
So good.
Kyle's Mom's a Bitch. Iconic. Let me ask you this though. You have children. Would you let them watch this film?
I've been thinking a lot about this. I know it's very. Lily is 14. My oldest is 14. Your niece. I don't think she'd be interested. So I'm off the hook. At least right now. I don't want to stereotype her, but I don't think this is really her flavor right now. I know your nephew, Graydon, my 10-year-old, would love it. I know he would think this is the funniest thing in the whole world. It's kind of, I'm half amazed that it's off his radar with the advent of YouTube and how into YouTube the kids are. It's very easy to see this if you knew how to look for it. So the fact that it's off his radar is funny. I think it is. Hopefully it is. There's the bad parent part of myself really wants me to show him, maybe not the movie, but maybe a more innocuous episode. If I could find one, if that exists, because I just think he would, the Irreverence would really speak to him. But I have to wait. I'm going to force myself to wait, but maybe, what do you think? Like, you're not a dad, but you're certainly an uncle. What do you think would be like a good age to introduce this to a kid? You were young.
Yeah, I was young. I mean, my answer is always that like we are more prepared, or maybe you and I were, more prepared than anyone gave us credit for. And by the time I was 10 years old, I had seen like every episode of Beavis and Butthead, every episode of like Ren and Stimpy and all this stuff and was just about a few years away from Daria and all this other stuff. I just feel like this is crude humor. I feel like Graydon probably wouldn't even understand a lot of it.
That's probably true.
Which might be he's going to think, it's what I said about the evolution of offense. He'll think Uncle Fucker is funny. He won't understand why Blame Canada is funny.
Right, exactly. Good point.
It's not even a real country anyway.
It's so
First of all, I just love the animation about how they make the Canadians just like these.
Dude, how great is that?
Why did they
the detached jaw?
Yeah, it's awesome.
And then Baby Ike was adopted from Canada. That's why he's like that. Like, I love that. Like, it's so stupid. Like, it's so funny. How can it possibly be offensive? Yeah, you're right. There's certain things like that he wouldn't understand. I also wonder, because Canada is such an animation centric nation. Like they're notorious for doing animation. Their government helps fund their animation industry. They've always had a very rich animation education history and industry up in Canada. And it's very easy it's notoriously, historically, very easy for Canadians to cross the line and work in the United States. But and I've been very fortunate. I've worked for several Canadian studios, but they don't hire outside of Canada because their workforce has to be like 90% Canadian in order to get that money from the government. So it's a very closed off system. And I wonder if there's a little sort of ribbing about that's part of it, being that, the animation thing, and that still goes on. And I'm not, I have a lot of friends that are Canadian animators, but the industry is just set up that way. And I wonder if I never heard that, but I wonder if that's a part of it. I wonder if that's a part of like the razzing.
That's interesting. Yeah, the games are the same way, as you know.
Right.
Especially Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia dump lots of money into all of this stuff, and you often see in video game credits, you know, that it's very similar to like the Georgia stuff now with TV shows, where you just see that in the credits or whatever. So, Dave, let me ask you about the themes, and I think this goes back to understanding the 90s and why I think this episode and this movie might be really interesting to younger audiences that listen to us, because it's, again, so quaint to think about the things we were worried about, yet we're all also worried about the same thing. So you think about 1999, June 1999, this is right after Columbine, for instance, right? So we're still talking about Columbine these 22 years later. But I love the idea, and I think you would agree, that the Terrence and Phillip movie, Ashes of Fire, it's supposed to be making fun of bad parents. The whole movie is about bad parenting. And I love that they identified this, because we know that they really began to write this and mature this very early on in the first season, that they identified the major problem that South Park was having, if they wanted to call it a problem. I don't think anyone involved thought it was a problem, including Comedy Central and certainly these guys, but which is that parents were going after them for the distasteful nature of the show. And again, I think parents were looking for a little something to beat up. And I think that stuff like The Simpsons, for how much I don't like it, I think it's just a little too clever and not as crude to like attract that kind of attention. I think that's almost maybe the reason why I just wasn't smart enough probably when I was introduced to The Simpsons to even get it. But I feel like maybe it might be lost on a younger audience about this was the era, like I said, getting away from the evangelical Christian right and moving more towards mainstream parents eschewing their duties as parents over their children, and then blaming video games like Jack Thompson would do at this time, blaming music, the Insane Clown Posse, and Eminem. I mean, Eminem during this era, Eminem was getting lambasted by Congress, and everyone was just wondering, like, and Eminem would rap about it as himself, like, what about the parents? Yeah. And this was a complete making a farce of that. And I wonder how you feel about that, and also kind of as a parent what you take away from it, because I always wonder why parents aren't more involved, and yet it seems like many parents aren't. And so I feel like there must be some sort of reason. So what do you think about the theme and kind of how it plays out both then and through the lens of today?
Yeah, it's a great point, man. And there's so much to talk about there. I love talking about The Simpsons in the same breath as South Park, first of all, because, you know, both long lasting prime time animated series that lasted, you know, for such a long time, and both still so relevant, both seemingly not going away. And I love that, you know, I didn't know this previously, but there's a real attaboy across the aisle between the Simpsons squad and the team over at South Park, and sort of a common enemy or looking down upon of the Family Guy.
Yeah, no, they all hate Family Guy. It's so funny to me.
Which is like interesting. And, you know, Trey and Matt talk about like the cutaway model and how it doesn't work for them and how it's cheap. And personally, I have to say I disagree. I think the cutaway model is simple, but it's pretty brilliant, because what I always loved about that was the fact that it leaves you open to do anything. I mean, it's like limitless. And by the cutaway model I'm talking about, guys, if you're familiar with Family Guy, they could just do a little non sequitur cutaway to anything. You know, they can mention like, oh, I saw that on Star Trek last night. And then they cut away to a view of the bridge and their Spock and, you know, whoever, you know, whatever, on the bridge of the Enterprise or whatever. They could just cut back and keep rolling with the story. They could just cut away to the Kool-Aid Man, right? That whole classic.
Oh, yeah. Man. Oh, yeah. And also my favorite one is from an early episode where he's like, he says something about Benjamin Disraeli, and then they just cut to Benjamin Disraeli and he's like, you don't even know who I am. And he's like, he is just some like obscure British prime minister from the 19th century. And I remember being like, no, I don't know who you are. Like when I was watching that and had when it looked
Dude,
it up.
It's such a great model, and they thought of it first. Give them credit, you know, give them the shot in the arm for that. But I love talking about those two in the same breath. But it's also occurs to me that as funny as The Simpsons is, and as you said, like as brilliant and maybe a little too on the nose sometimes, just with how clever it is, that the fact that they are different. The Simpsons is a more traditional family sitcom dynamic. It's about a dysfunctional family, but in a different way. And I love, you know, at first I'm thinking like these themes in South Park, is it just, you know, this sort of absurdist, exaggerated, fun poke at the world, or there are really themes in there. But it really does seem like bad parenting is a perpetual theme, not only in the film, but in the show, where, you know, bad parenting, sort of eschewing their responsibilities, scapegoating media, like you said, scapegoating TV shows, scapegoating film, scapegoating video games, and all that kind of stuff. Definitely seems like a big part of what they're saying with the show. And, you know, not only that, but of course, lampooning politics, making fun of religion, calling censorship into question. All of these things are a big part of what they're sort of taking shots at. And again, I think from a very genuine place, like it's something that they continuously sort of bombard. All of these issues, all of these themes seem to be recurring. And I think that's what makes it, you know, it makes it beyond the comedy. It makes it pretty thoughtful when you really stop and think about it. And I love the bad parenting thing specifically because it's something that I think a lot of people could relate to. You know, we have busy lives, and it almost even like you could even take little teaching lessons out of it because we're all busy. A lot of households like mine, you know, we both work, both have careers, have a house to take care of, a mortgage. You have a kid or two or three, and, you know, you don't always have time to do everything you want to do. You don't always have the time to spend. You don't always have, you know, you don't always have the energy. You know, you just, sometimes you're sleepy, whatever it is, but it really is a good reminder. It's important to sort of put your money where your mouth is and be a parent and not I am not one to scapegoat media. I think there's a place for everything. And I think if a piece of media isn't appropriate for a human being at a certain age, certainly they should have a chance to see it at, you know, when the time is appropriate. That's, and I know I'm a little liberal when it comes to that, but that's really my outlook. But I think it's funny to think about, right? We think of South Park, we think how ridiculous it is, we think how over the top it is, how offensive it could be to some people, but you could take little nuggets of wisdom out of it. And I think it's a good reminder, you know, when you see Sheila, you know, Cartman, or you see Stan's parents and they're acting badly or acting out or setting a bad example, it's obvious. And I think that's what makes it funny. And I think we see that in the parents in our lives, and not our own parents, but the parents in our lives. And sometimes we see that in ourselves where it's like, it's not, you know, it's not the video game. It's the fact that I haven't really been as attentive, maybe even get a little introspective as parents.
Yeah, sure. Know? Well, that's what I love about it, seemingly innocuous or ridiculous or silly content that is deeper than that. I love that you brought up Monty Python earlier, and they obviously got Eric Idle involved in this as well, but which is cool as hell.
So
but
cool.
It's very similar in the sense that, like, I remember not really understanding. I don't know what it's in. Is it in Life of Brain or something? But Brian, sorry, my brain.
Yeah.
Where it's the Ministry of Silly Walks. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No,
and they like,
you
gotta look it up.
Go back into Monty Python.
It's just like dudes that work for like the British government, as I recall, that just like they just walk really weird, and it's like the Ministry of Silly Walks, and like and it's just making fun of like the government. But as a kid, it's just funny to me because it's the same reason why Patsy, who's like a great character in Holy Grail, who's like his man with the coconuts, is funny on multiple levels. Because when I was a kid, I'm like, oh, it's funny. There's a dude following him around with a coconut, but it's actually like making fun of serfdom and like vassalship and all of that kind of stuff, which you don't really get, and most people probably would never get, and it doesn't really matter to the humor. I feel like there's multiple levels of humor in South Park as well, and so going after the parents in really overt and over the top ways, like Mrs. Cartman being in Shisa movies is like super fucking funny, right? It's ridiculous.
It's so funny,
and he's like, would you tell me that? And she's like, sure, hon, you know, and like, and just walks away. Just really wonderful.
Sure.
Just really wonderful, like, parents that just don't give a fuck, and it's quite relatable. I feel like their embracing of almost white trash culture is what makes it so funny, because, and maybe people that haven't been exposed to white trash are a little maybe confused, but the humor is right on the money. If you know people that are,
sure,
you know, lower class white people that have and it's not an economic thing. People can be rich and be low class white people. And so they have Kenny's parents who are obviously like alcoholics and like totally ridiculous. But
Kenny,
even the more affluent amongst them are like Kyle and Stan's families are are in on it as well, in on kind of the degradation. But I also think there's other themes here too that are really timely. It's funny because this is during the Clinton administration. So there's a lot of stuff about imperialism in this. The invasion of Canada is funny because it's something, it is an overt American like overreaction, or we're just going to destroy this country for no reason. And because they're of some affront, right? And take these people and like execute them, but have like a show beforehand and all of that. It's really quite wonderful in that regard too. And then I think that there are some interesting side conversations to have as well. What do you think about the whole clitoris side, like the side thing? Because I love when Chef he's just like, oh, that's easy. You just got to find the clitoris, to like
and
these
he
little
realizes
kids.
what he said. He's
Yeah,
like, oh,
it's
shit.
so funny. And then probably one of the funniest scenes too is when they're at, I guess, who's Shelly? Shelly is Kyle's sister, right? I
think Shelly is Stan's sister.
Stan's sister.
I think it's Stan's sister, yeah.
So they're at Stan's house, and then Kyle is like, Shelly, where's the clitoris? And there's just like a beat, and then she just takes a chair, just beats him over the head with it. It's so funny. What did you think about that whole side story? It was about this quest for the clitoris.
Dude, it's so crazy. Like, because that's where, now I know a big thing with Matt Stone and Trey Parker is, we talk about themes, and I know a lot of it is their whole thing of like, we want to show how kids really are, not how they are on the surface in school or behaving properly in front of their parents, but how they're together when they're out of earshot of adults. Right. This is what the conversations they have. Maybe not in 3rd or 4th grade. That's certainly an exaggeration, but you could certainly say in 8th or 9th grade. Right. This is definitely, again, it's an animated series. They're exaggerating it. I think that's what makes it really funny. But it crosses over into previously almost untrodden territory for when the show started, where you're talking about a 3rd grader talking about a clit. It's like, all right, like, like alarm bells do sound a little bit. But the way they handle it just makes, again, being so exaggerated, being so absurd that, Stan runs into this giant clit at the end. It's this enormous Jabba the Hutt, like a pink blob, basically, like a gumdrop. And it's like, it takes the piss out of it. You know what I mean? It just makes it to where you can't, for me, it takes the offensiveness away and just crosses over into like, this is the craziest thing ever. And it becomes funny. You have to laugh. For me, you have to laugh, I love the way they handle it with Chef, where he's an adult and it's like a slip of the tongue and he tries to backpedal right away. He's like, oh, forget I said that, type of thing. But the fact that he would even say that to begin with, can you imagine that happening in an elementary school? Like, it could shatter a whole community if that really happened in real life. I mean, really, literally. So
it's so funny.
It's so funny, dude. And, it's just they're just so adept at just doing it just so. You would think, look at this show on its surface, it seems very haphazard. It seems very absurdist. It's crazy. There's a lot going on. It's like it's thrown together really quick. We know each episode's done in a week, but there's a real science to the comedy and the way they pull things off to be able to really, quite frankly, to be able to air it on network television, on cable television. So, that's, there's a lot to that. I think it's like I think they actually, if you really look at it, they make it look easy, but it's definitely not. I mean, they definitely have it down to a science. I think they naturally were just born to do this job. They figured it out early and they just keep going. And the fact that they still must be so entertained or fulfilled by what they do, because it hasn't changed a lot. Now, of course, they could evolve. They have a bigger budget. They could do more characters. They have better software. But for the most part, it's really what they've been doing for the last 20 years. And the fact that they still find it worth doing, I think, says a lot, too, that they still have things to say, because it's so different than most animated fare, right? It's not just gorgeous art style. It's not like they're trying to say a lot visually. Again, the visual component is just sort of there in service to the comedy. So it's really what they're saying. It's really the writing and the characters and the message and the story that they're sort of putting up on the pedestal and pushing to the forefront, which is different than most things.
I actually like the scene where it seems like they're making fun of themselves or making fun of people criticizing the animation, and they're like, but the animation style is so shitty, and then there's just really over animated like scene of them walking by, which is so good.
I love stuff like that.
You're right, it's very smart and very funny, and I'm reading some of my notes, like just some of because they do some, it's funny that they're so critical of Family Guy for the cutaways, which I know are a little more non sequitur, but I'm even reading the notes and it's like, well, the whole Bill Gates thing in this is a cutaway, and it's super funny. And it's also very topical about Windows 98 and how horrible it was. And they just shoot him right in the head. And then the Winona Ryder thing is so weird too, with the ping pong balls. And I totally forgot about that gag. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And then she's just paddling them, and she's like, that's my ping pong ball trick or whatever.
And you know what, dude? That's very smart too. And it goes back to what you said, I think, very smartly about Graydon not being able to get, like, Graydon wouldn't get that joke yet at 10. And that's the thing. If a kid snuck into the room and saw that airing, it becomes pretty innocuous. Now, to adults, we know exactly what they were saying there. But if a 9-year-old walks into the room, they're not going to get what that was all about. The same thing with the clit. They're just going to think, what is that big purple, big pink blob that he was talking to? They always find a way to get themselves out of trouble very cleverly. They always pull it off.
The only other things that I wanted to mention in terms of topical nature is one of the things that I like is that they give Cartman the V chip in the show, which is shocking him when he's cursing. People should know that this is based on a real thing, not the shocking part, but the V chip. Do you remember the V chip?
No,
by chance?
No.
The V chip was like a really big news story in the 90s because it was a thing that they were going to put in televisions to allow parents to like cut out. It was kind of before they started rating everything. There was going to be like a lockout, like a parent lockout in TVs, and they started promoting this thing called the V chip. And one of the major things that was brought in, I guess, during that time of being like, well, you can lock your kids out from watching South Park with the V chip. And so they literally put the V chip in the film just as doing something else and calls it the V chip. And I looked it up to make sure. And I'm like, no, it totally is. It's the V chip. It's totally referencing that. So that is an absolute 90s reference, which is very cool. And I like that. And then, of course, I'm curious what you think about the whole Satan and Saddam Hussein thing. I think this is interesting because Saddam Hussein's dead now.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, because you had brought up the pre-9/11 thing. Iraq obviously had nothing to do with 9/11, but caught up in the whole furor afterwards was we invaded Iraq and ultimately ended up killing Saddam Hussein. But this is before that second invasion after Desert Storm, and he was still alive. So I think that's really like a funny inclusion that kind of lost its humor and is one of the few parts of the movie that's locked to that very specific time because it wouldn't even really make any sense a couple of years later when he was on the run. Remember like the military found him in like a hole. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Where, like Saddam Hussein was literally found in like a hole with like $100,000 on himself, and then they just executed him. Yeah. So what did you think about that whole like Satan and Saddam Hussein, but Satan being kind of sensitive and not really being sad about the way Saddam treats him and all of that? It's so strange. You're like, you can tell that everything in this, even though it gets to a certain point, everything in the movie is just in service of a few different ideas that they had, and they needed to wrap them together. So the way they got Satan in is to say, like, when the Canadians' blood hits American soil, Satan will spawn or whatever.
Right. He'll come and take over the earth. It's so funny, dude. It is really important to remember that this is pre-9/11 Saddam Hussein. We were already engaged in sort of protracted combat or bad feelings or bad blood or whatever. But, that is interesting, pre all the spider hole business. This was before all that. I love the idea of taking something like Satan, which is like supposedly this, forbidden topic, this name that we shall not speak, and making him big and badass looking, but then giving him like a typically feminine sensitivity, right? He's Saddam, who is, the boyfriend, he's just out for sex. Satan's feeling really underappreciated and underloved. He just wants to cuddle tonight, type of thing, which is really funny. I mean, that's just funny. Who does that? Just awesome. Taking something and just flipping it, which is hilarious. And also, I love the fact that they take the characters with clear legs. They're not just, like little legless figurines, and they still bop him along. He still doesn't have a walk cycle. His legs just stay static, and he just bops along, even though he clearly has those legs. So funny, dude. It's so funny. And we just say, like, the few things that I've seen just in passing and catching an episode of South Park or two where they either have time or they feel it was necessary to animate it a little better, it falls flat for me. I don't want to see that in South Park. Make it as crude and rudimentary as possible. That really plays up the comedy. That's really important to say too. Like the fact that it almost looks like it's done by kids makes that, I think, really makes the comedy more acceptable. But it certainly makes the comedy more successful also. Like moving it in a rudimentary fashion and really taking any fluidity or smoothness out of the action is absolutely essential for the show to work. Like it really has to be harsh. It has to be staccato. There can't be any movement that looks pleasing to the eye. It has to really look like cut paper under glass done by an amateur, you know? And it does for the most part, you know. Once in a while I'll see something like even in the movie, like maybe like the exterior, the establishing shot of the school before they cut in, like the flagpole waving on the flag waving on the flagpole. I'm like, no, that's too well animated. Like you need to do that shittier.
That's so funny. I noticed that flag as well. That's so funny.
Did you notice that?
Yeah, I just noticed. I didn't think anything of it. I'm just like, oh, I noticed that there's an anime. That flag is even animated
it's hard,
at all.
Dude. It's really hard. Like I worked on I don't usually like to admit this, but I worked on a purposely badly animated show that some of you guys might remember. It was kind of a flash in the pan, but it was called Assy McGee and it was on Adult Swim. And we did it for an animation studio up in Boston. And I remember the guys from Boston met us in New York. We met halfway. And my friend Dave was directing, the animation director. And they sat with us. There was like, ironically, a lot of us went on to be the team at Sesame Workshop. But they called us into this meeting. It was kind of like putting the idea together, before we launched into the first episode. And the people at the studio that created it were like, this cannot be animated well. The idea is to animate it badly. That's part of the comedy. And as animators, you say, okay, I get it. And you draw it up to certain things that you've seen, Godzilla versus Bambi or South Park or something. And you're like, I get it. I understand, Monty Python, and I get it. Cut paper. And you go back and just as an animator, you just want to, that's just a natural instinctual thing that you want to do. You want to make it a little better. You want to make it a little tighter. You want to show off a little bit, but you can't in this show. It takes a lot of discipline. I really give the animation people a lot of credit for that, to actually, because you're basically pulling your ego out and you're saying like, no, it has to be this way. That's the way the show is. That's that's the brief. That's the brief. That's the way it needs to be. And that's the way it needs to stay for consistency. You can't have that flag in there. We noticed it.
Yeah, it's funny that came up because that did catch my eye. I don't know for what reason. I'm wondering, as we kind of begin to close out, what characters stood out to you? Because I do love this. I know that there's such a huge array of characters in South Park's universe now, and I was kind of introduced to that through the video games. Actually, like how like Kenny's not even in it anymore, and so I know all of that. Like eventually he goes away and Butters becomes like a bigger character and everyone else. And you could see some people in this that didn't get their shine. Like Token is in this and all of that. Who's the black guy?
Oh, right.
Like their black friend and Token and all of that. But which are the characters that in this particular film that stood out to you as being interesting from that kind of early cast of South Park?
It's funny. They're all, and again, we got to be careful because you can't really delve into what you know from the show, which I know very little. I'm pretty uneducated.
Me too. I mean, I don't have much knowledge.
And we'll get there. And I think a good way to do it now that we've had this conversation is you take it to the next level. Maybe you do, there's a lot of seasons to cover. Maybe you do a few seasons at a time, talk about them in a cursory way and just, explore those key moments. But I love every character. I was really curious about how they were going to explore. I know this was early on. Like you said, there was only a season. They were just starting season 2 or something. So they really only had a season out to the public that people would be able to draw back to. And I was really curious about the 4 boys, the 4 protagonists, 3rd graders. They'll eventually be 4th graders, as we know in the series, but 3rd graders at this time, I believe. And just seeing the different personalities, these key characters. We talked about Freaks and Geeks, or we talk about something like Ninja Turtles. You have the 3 or 4 different personalities. They're a team. How do they play off each other? I love it that they're types. They're so relatable. Cartman is the bratty, overly spoiled kid. His mom is sort of the doting, refusing to acknowledge the fact that her son's a bastard type. You have Kyle, who's sort of hot tempered. You have Kenny, who somehow makes sense. The poor kid. If this was like a live action thing, he would have like the patina of dirt. He'd have the green snot caked in his nose. The parka just makes sense, like wearing the winter gear even in the warm weather. Like, it just makes sense. They're just all types, whether it's the kids or the teachers or the parents. The counselor, the Mr. Mackey character with the okay. The whole thing. Like, we know, like, it resonates. Like, even if we can't articulate it, like, we've definitely experienced people like this in our lives. I love it. The one character for me that I'm still trying to figure out, and again, the series might clearly define this, is the Stan character, because he seems a little watered down. We know he has the love interest. Maybe he's a little more the sensitive type. Maybe you could consider him the head protagonist. He has the nervous reaction where he always throws up, which I think is funny. Now, I don't know if that exists in the series or not, because I'm not educated enough on the series yet. But he seems like, the Kyle's maybe defined by his ongoing perpetual feud with Cartman. And then Kenny, of course, is the character who, we know is, poor Kenny. He's got the neglectful parents who are, have substance abuse problems, and he's poor and all that kind of stuff. And Cartman,
and he's going to die. I mean, that was the big thing in the early episodes too, which is that he died in every episode.
He's going to die every time. Right. And we knew that by now, right? That was already a thing. That was already a thing.
That was the thing.
They Spirit of Christmas short.
And that was what I think they tried to play with in the movie, was to, like, he died and then he ends up becoming a huge character in the afterlife.
Right, exactly.
Which I thought was kind of clever, actually, and going back and watching it. That was another thing,
dude. Besides thrusting kids into these situations with cursing and sexual content and everything, the scene in this movie, and again, this was really cool for me because this is not a movie that I was re-exploring. I have never seen this movie before. The thing that actually made me shout out loud, I was like, holy shit. Like, I was like, oh my God, like, was the scene where Kenny dies on the operating table and the doctors are like ripping out his guts and doing all this crazy shit. And then he's thrust into hell. And I'm like, this is a fucking third grader. This is something that you don't do in TV and film content. You never see this. And they pull it off and they make it funny and they make you feel guilty for laughing at it, but you're fucking laughing at it anyway.
There's so many. I love that you brought up that scene because there's so many funny parts of it. First is like the doctors like are really upset for 1 second and then they just leave. And the second part is like the kids are all talking or they're talking and Kenny's just dead bodies in the background like the entire time.
His husk, dead scarred.
It's awesome. It's
and George Clooney's in that bit, right? He plays the doctor in that bit with the baked potato in the microwave. Dude, I'm just shocked at what they were able to get away. And this is not. I think we're a little more, I would argue that we're a little more conditioned now, 20 years later. You're talking about earlier time, 99, feature film, movie theaters, people going to see this. Bill Hader talks about seeing this movie. I don't know if he was involved in the writer room yet. He was just a fan. He wasn't involved with South Park yet, the comedian Bill Hader. He talked about going to see this a couple of times when he was living in LA. And the second time he went to see it, here comes a mom and her flock of kids in there. And he's like, oh shit, just watch this because this is going to be bad. And like within minutes, the mom was like shooing the kids out. But can you imagine? Because a lot of people in the 90s, I think before animation was more of a household name in this country, uneducated adults would just see animated fare and just be like, oh, that's for the kids. We'll get them out of the house for 3 hours on a Saturday type of thing. So, dude, it's they amazing even lose what they got.
It's even the double entendre of the film's title is even lost on many people, including parents. Bigger, longer, and uncut is a phallic reference. So, Dig, I just wanted to give a shout out to a couple characters that we had already brought up Mr. Mackey, who I loved, and I remember my friends always used to make me or ask me to do Mr. Mackey impressions when I was younger because I love Mr. Mackey. It's easy. He's great. I love that character. I'm always waiting for him to be like, okay. So
it's always funny.
It's just because you're waiting and they kind of don't do it for a minute and then he just throws it in. So I love him. I love Big Gay Al. I wish he was in it more. Big Gay Al is ridiculous.
So good.
Mr. Slave isn't in it at all, who's like his partner, but
that's right.
But it would have been cool to see more Big Gay Al because I think that character is hysterical. And
this his introduction? Was Big Gay Al in the first season?
No, I think he was already in it.
Okay.
I think he was like one of the early like neighbors.
Dude, he's
like, neighborhood
he's
people.
The best. I am I'm super. Thanks for asking. Is like one of my favorite parts of the whole
Yeah.
movie. It's so good. They beg him to do it.
Yeah, it's he's great. The character of Mole is really good in the movie.
Oh, dude. That character is amazing.
Yeah, he's funny. He reminds me a little bit of the 10th grade character in Freaks and Geeks that we were talking about. You know, like he's a little bit old. The shaman-esque character that they keep meeting. He always reminds me of him.
He's got the cigarette. You know what? He's a direct. He was weird for me because he was a direct reference, I think, to the French demolition expert / saboteur character in The Guns of Navarone, which is an old war movie. You know, he had the shovel and the bandolier and the cigarette perpetually hanging out of his mouth, and he was the badass.
And they call him British. They call him British at one point too, which I think is funny. He's clearly not British. Yeah, he's a great character to have seen. And then I just wrote down again, and we had talked about it. Seeing Kenny get killed and playing with that was big at the time, and seeing Kenny's face. As I recall, this was the first time you saw that Kenny was like blonde and saw his face. And I remember that being like a really big reveal that people were excited about. But I think the main through line for me, and of course seeing like Shelley Marsh and all that. By the way, I do have to give a shout out. And I didn't know if I remembered this properly, and I looked it up and I did. Mary Kay Bergman. Do you know that name?
Yeah, chance? You know what? I was thinking about who is that?
So she was like the original female voice actress.
Okay.
For all of the roles on South Park, and she died in 1999, like very early on in the run.
Oh my God.
And so this was, I think, her last appearance as like those characters, and then they got so she was like the Mrs. Cartman and all like the females like for the first couple seasons, and I think in the film. So got to give her a shout out because I remember reading that a long time ago that like they lost someone early on, and it was her.
Wow.
So
that's a shame.
So yeah, she's in this, and otherwise I just to your point, it makes me want to go and watch more of it. And it's the same feeling I've had, like I said, multiple times in my life. And I really encourage people to not only go see this film if you want. I think a lot of you are familiar with South Park, but if you've not played the games,
oh man,
it's very rare for games to make you laugh. They're just not funny. Games are not funny. It's very rare to play like a Leisure Suit Larry which Dagan worked on, or something else where a South Park game where it's like, wow, this is really actually funny. And those games are so good, especially because they're role-playing games. And I think in those games and in this movie, there was a similar theme for me too, which was creating a world in which the kids, except for like it's a little different in the movie, but like whatever the kids' interpretation of events is not real. And I loved that they play with that more later on in the stuff I've seen. The games are about them being like playing like wizards kind of Dungeons and Dragons stuff and like superheroes, like they're pretending in the games. And that's what's so fun about them. And to your point, it's like these are young kids. So it's fun to think about it through their lens. And even Kenny going into heaven and like the girls with like their boobs hanging out and stuff. It's like, that's so inappropriate for a third grader.
God.
You know, it's so fun. It's fun. I don't think I realized that kind of stuff when I was younger. And I think that's part of the humor is that these kids are so young.
Yeah.
It's not that they're kids. It's that they're like ridiculously young for all of these conversations.
It's like
ridiculously
4 or 5
young.
years ahead of where those fantasies should lie.
It's great.
You know, dude, I love that you brought up the video games because now we have a rule on KnockBack that we firmly established now. So we're still a few years away from being able to play the Stick of Truth because that came out in 2014. Right. I haven't played the Fractured Butthole either. But I love the fact of how intimately, you know, I don't know anything about these games except how, you know, sought after they are and how well regarded they are. But I love hearing the fact that Parker and Stone, huge gamers, both very much involved in both of these games. And it was important to know why, because there was a couple of shovelware type games that came out for the N64 or PlayStation early on, like South Kart.
There was a kart racer, I think.
Yeah, there was a kart racer, and there was one or two others that were really poor. I'm working on that N64 book now, and I think that South Park game actually almost got onto my list. I think they pulled it and gave it to another writer, but I asked for it, I think. So I never got an opportunity to play it, but apparently they were really bad. You know, typical franchisee games that were just poorly done, quickly, scrambled to get out into the market. So they were really involved with these games. So I can't wait to be able to play one of them for the show. Now that I'm becoming I'm reminded of how much I love South Park in general. I think I might have to go in and do that on my free time. I'll start with the Stick of Truth just because I feel like I should go in order.
Yeah, you should, because one references the other, because one takes place after the other. So definitely play them in order.
Oh, they do? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that they were done by two different studios. I had no idea.
Yeah, so what ended up, the original story of the first one of Stick of Truth is interesting because Obsidian made that game, very well-regarded role-playing game studio that Xbox now owns. But at that time, they were independent. They're known as like the original Fallout guys and stuff. Okay. And they have like huge bona fides, or bona fides, if you want to say it right. And so what ended up happening though with this game is that people might remember, it was more than 10 years ago now, THQ melted down, or it was about 10 years ago. And THQ put out U-Draw. They were way overextended. They went out of business very rapidly. And this game, along with many other games and licenses, was put on the market. And it was purchased by Ubisoft. That's how Ubisoft got hold of the IP, and Obsidian made the game. And then what ended up happening with the second one is that instead of having some of the external studio did it, they just did it themselves, which was the cheaper thing to do and smarter move for them to do. But they're both very, very, in fact, I think that RPG is the first Ubisoft San Francisco game. So an American team made it, and it's very, very good. So I highly recommend that.
Oh, it's awesome. I can't wait to play those.
Stick of Truth, I kind of suffered because it came out on PS3 in 2014. So it was after PS4 had already come out. And obviously PS4 is not backwards compatible. So I think a lot of people just didn't play it. And then it ended up getting ported later, but I don't think a lot of people paid attention. I think, as I understand it, and I could be wrong, I think Trey Parker and Matt Stone have been pretty clear that like this took way too much time and that they don't really want to do it again. But
they're not going to go in for a third one? I
don't think so, because I think it like demanded, I think first of all, making the first one was like an awful experience for them as far as I know. And then I think the second one was kind of just there, and they did a really nice job with it, but I don't know if it's worth it, their time and effort for the returns.
I tip my cap to them wanting it to be good. You know, you think of like a Jim Davis, like just shoveling out Garfield, whatever, you know, having a team of people doing everything and not even being very hands off. So the fact that they want something to be good, I tip my cap. I have no idea how they would have time for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's because they're very intensive, and they're very people that are in the South Park will say they're very true. These games, they're very, and hey, that's one of the cool things that I even realized watching the movie, and that I learned from playing the games, is that South Park is a location with places that are in locations juxtaposed to other places. It's like a map, and it's the same, and you kind of see that in the movie. And then when you play the games are both on the same map. Because they both take place. And I love that. So like, you know, the rhinoplasty place is where it is, and the Chinese food place is where it is, and the school's where it is, and all their houses are where it is, and they're all in relation to each other. So it's pretty neat that they've created a sort of universe, and yet it seems kind of underappreciated, no matter how many Cartman shirts were in the 90s and stuff. I was surprised to see this movie only made $80 million at the box office. I was going in expecting like 400 million or something like that. I don't know, like what I was expecting. Maybe not that high, but 250 million. It didn't even make $100 million. So wow, it still seemed like a little bit of a secret then, you know? Yeah. And I feel like South Park, maybe that's the energy that the show has, is that it's, on one hand, everyone knows what it is, and on the other hand, it's just kind of persisted without being noticed by very many people. Because I think if it was noticed by more and more and more people, I don't know that Comedy Central would have such an easy time getting it on the air. It's the same thing Always Sunny guys always say, is that like part of the reason FX doesn't care what they do is because no one even notices what they do.
They can't gun for it if they don't know it.
Right. Like they don't have any idea. Like I would imagine people watching Sunny would be very surprised by how inappropriate it is. And I love that shows like that. Another show that I really love like that is Workaholics. I don't know if you've ever seen that show.
I've seen a few.
But like they even have like a running joke in that show where like one of their friends has a van and they call it the rap van, and they write rap van on it, and then someone just puts an E and it says rape van, and then they just keep it that way for seasons on Comedy Central. And it's just a thing. They're just driving into the thing. It's just rape van spray painted on the side.
That is so funny, man. That is so crazy. Comedy Central has a thing. Like I was thinking about Trey Parker and Matt Stone, right? Very anti-Hollywood, very anti-establishment, fuck you to the man type thing. But it's important to remember they work for a gigantic media conglomerate in Viacom. Right? Yeah. Viacom. Now, Viacom's not Hollywood. They're based in New York. You know, they're the umbrella company over VH1 and MTV and, you know, whatever Spike was once, and Comedy Central, and CBS now I think is under that umbrella and all that. So a major, you know, like Comcast, like a major, you know, media conglomerate the fact that, now they run with each little thing runs with some sort of autonomy underneath that Viacom umbrella. But Comedy Central, their sensibilities have been really great with, embracing comedy. They have Tosh, they have Sarah Silverman, animation. They've been very forward thinking and fashion forward with, embracing things and welcoming things and ushering things in and championing things. So it's important to say that because it's funny, their other sister companies don't always have the same success with the forward thinking. Think of MTV, think of VH1, think of, MTV basically fell off, largely. So it's really interesting. And some things don't even exist anymore. I don't think, is Spike even a thing anymore?
I don't think so. Or they change names at some point again.
They withstood the test of time. You know what the other thing I was thinking, Kyle? I don't remember, you help me out with this. I don't remember a piece of content, a show or a movie or whatever, that relies so heavily for the comedy on one character as we have Eric Cartman as the linchpin of South Park. He seems responsible for 50% of the reason why you would watch this. He's such an ignoramus. The way he talks, just the way he talks is hilarious. Even when he's not cursing or acting inappropriate or, making you like blush with his curses or making you squirm with his anti-Semitism and cringe and everything. There's just something really funny about him. I don't know if it's that was relatable. We all knew a brat like that. Maybe not quite so animated or overt. It's got
kind of a Seinfeld feel in a way where it's like Kramer and George are kind of, you rely on them for a lot of the comedy. But I think it's a little, I agree with you in that I think it's a little over-reliant on Cartman, but it's...
If you take him out, I don't know that there would be a show,
No, I don't think so either. Everyone loves Cartman. I mean, I know everyone hates Cartman, but everyone loves him because he's funny. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
You absolutely need him there. The only thing I wanted to close with, Kyle, is I learned that this is unheard of in animation. So from an animator perspective, that they were in 2014 or 2015, Comedy Central just came in and were like, you guys are renewed for the next 4 years, the next 4 seasons. That does not happen. I don't think that's ever happened with another animated TV series that I know of. Maybe even live action could be included in that, cable or network. The other thing is they did it again. In 2019, apparently, it was for a little shorter. They were like, you guys are signed on through 2022, which I guess would be season 26, if I'm not mistaken. The fact that they're still doing that 2 decades into a run of a show is insane. That's just complete insanity. I can't even believe it. And, more power to them, man. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think hopefully, I think it's pretty clear that everyone in the corporate leadership around the show moving on hopefully was smart enough to just stay out of the way, or at least someone was smart enough to say like, hey, these guys are going to print us money, just shut up and stay out of the way. And just let them do it. And they were the ones, I just reading a little bit about it, they were very overt about that, being like, you guys don't know how to market our stuff, you don't know how to make trailers, you guys suck.
Yes.
Them like that. Really playing hardball, and I love that. I love that they were smart enough very early on to retain control. And it's the same thing Lucas did with Star Wars. Like it's essential. And they were able to say like, your trailers suck, your marketing is terrible, and you don't understand our show, you don't know why it's funny and all that, and just leave us alone. And I think that they won. And because I think everyone realizes like, okay, like we don't have to do anything. They're just going to make us money. That's amazing. That's what ended up happening.
It's crazy. You're right. They have a real business savvy, or at least they, like we said earlier, they stand their ground. There was one story, I don't know which one of them did it. There was a trailer cut. They said it was terrible. It was very typical, like, in a world, like that type of thing. One of them took the trailer, took the reel off, put it in their trunk, went home for the weekend so they couldn't air it. Got a call from their lawyer, who they said their lawyer was like a rock star, always on their side. And they were like, dude, Matt or Trey, whoever it was, they were like, dude, you got to give the reel back. They could put you in jail for this. You like stole it from the studio. But they wouldn't give it back until they cut a trailer that they then supervised or lorded over so they could get it there. Who knows? Maybe that would have worked the other way. Maybe it would have been like an appropriate parody of a trailer. Maybe people would have taken it that way. But yeah, I love the fact that these guys are like, just dudes that apparently just stick to their guns. And you could see that in the show. You really can. I love it. I'm so glad we did this episode because it put South Park back on my radar. I've been ignoring it. It's one of those things that I'm really scared of, you know, because it has such a big body of work now amassed. How do I jump into it? This is a great way to do it. You know, it's still going to be hard.
I'm glad you think so.
It's still going to be hard.
It is hard. It's all on Hulu. And I think Hulu is such a great subscription service for just people like us because there's so many good comedies on there. Seinfeld's on there, obviously, and others. But
that's right.
So it's a really great location for this kind of humor. And I hope people go check it out. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. Still, I think the only cinematic film from South Park. And I don't think they have any interest in doing it. And I don't think there's any money to be made doing it. So I think that's the reason.
Now. Yeah. What would they do? You know?
Yeah, they've already done it once and they got out of the way. Very similar to Beavis and Butthead, Do America, and others where it's like you just do your movie and you move on. Dig, let's end as tradition dictates on KnockBack with a dad joke.
All right, let's do it. I got it right here. Short and sweet, my friend Kyle. How do you get a country girl's attention?
Oh, I don't know.
A tractor.
Pretty good.
They like tractors.
Pretty good. They do like them down here in the South. Dig, I appreciate you very much. And I appreciate all of you guys out there. We appreciate you listening to our show, watching it on YouTube, listening on free feeds, and of course, supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia. You can get early ad-free access to every episode of the show. Submit your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas for the show. I did go through your inquiries for this episode, everyone, but I just didn't feel like you had very much interesting to say. I'm going to be honest with you. I just feel like I was expecting a little more about the deep delving into the 90s and about the different era. You know, I didn't see anything in there because it's just like, what's your favorite song? Well, that's fine.
Okay.
But I need a little bit more than that.
Okay. The gauntlet has been thrown down. You guys pay attention.
So, but, you know, support us over there if you want. Listen on YouTube, leave us a nice comment, whatever you want to do. We appreciate you. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Fuck you guys. I'm going ham.
Very well done. KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.